Hi everyone, today's model will be based on the logo on Mercy's shoulder from Overwatch. Let's get started. So the first thing we've got to do is fix up all the little print errors, all these little gaps and cracks. Now I'll be using a wood filler. It's basically a plaster of Paris with an extra drying agent. It's still water soluble and you should be able to pick up something quite similar from your local hardware store. Otherwise, you can also just use plaster of Paris. Now as you can see, I'm not being particularly careful here. All you have to do is just make sure you get everything filled because you don't want air bubbles to be trapped underneath. Now don't worry if it's a little bit rough. As I said, we're just trying to make sure we get all the little bubbles and cracks and gaps filled up, and we'll be sanding it in a moment anyway. Now it's time to sand. I've chosen 120 grit. It's a fairly good all-rounder, and this particular one is a no clog grit, and I'd really recommend it if you can find it at your local hardware store. Just as a reminder, make sure to remove all the dust every so often. This will make sure that when the paint goes down, you don't end up with a weird mix of dust and paint smearing all over it.
Now that the sanding's complete, we'll start painting. I'm going to start with the black for the wings. Now something that I've forgotten to do is to tape over and cover the circle in the middle, the actual halo symbol in the middle. This will stop it from getting too much splash over from the black as you're painting. With the center halo now covered, it's time to start actually painting. I'm using not a great deal of paint on the brush, and I'm just trying to get nice broad strokes in. The idea isn't to get it completely jet black on the first pass, just to start filling any of those holes that we were trying to get rid of earlier in, just making sure everything did turn out nice and smooth. Now what I'm doing here is using art masking fluid to cover up the pieces that I don't want paint to be permanently stuck to. It's entirely optional, and you may find that you've got a high enough level of painting skill not to need this, but I am terrible and I need this. And what art masking fluid is kind of like a natural latex. It'll dry on and then can be peeled off later. Now that we have the art masking fluid on, it's time to let it dry, and once it's dry, we'll start painting again. With the black all painted and dried, we can now start removing the art mask. It can be a little bit stringy and hard to get off, but it's fairly easy normally. Alright, let's take a look. It seems to be coming along pretty nicely. I'm really happy with the way the black's looking. Everything's dried nicely, and the masking fluid really has kept everything nice and straight in between the lines. So with that, it's on to painting the white. Now the white will only be for the pinned parts, but it can be a little tricky sometimes because it's all so fine there and you don't want to get any of the white on the black. Alright, that's looking pretty good. I'm just going to let this dry and then we can start painting. Just take a little bit of white on the tip of your brush and paint in big even strokes. This will make sure that it dries perfect. Like previously, I'm using a hairdryer to seal every layer, drying it completely before I paint the next one. With the white down and dried, it's time to start removing the mask. Occasionally, the mask will pull up a little bit of the black paint, but that's okay, we can just repaint those parts now. Now that we've repainted the black, and the white still looks pretty good, it's time to move on to hair drying this one more time, just making sure that it is 100% totally dry before we move on to the next painting stages. Before applying the gold paint, we're going to need to start masking off all the areas that we don't want gold painted. So grab some masking tape and start covering any part that's exposed other than where the halo is. I'm using a Scalpel here to smooth off any of the layers of masking tape that might be bubbling up. This will make sure that you get a great finish at the end by keeping any of the gold from getting where it wasn't meant to go. It's now time to start removing the masking tape from the halo. This will 1, let us make sure that none of the black has accidentally gotten underneath, and 2, allow us to start nipping away at any of the masking tape we've just applied that might be overlapping. Once you're happy with the masking, give the halo a base coat of white. This will make sure that the gold paint that we're about to use will actually stick to it. Make sure to give the can a nice strong shake before you start, and then start by evenly spraying across the print, starting off and then finishing off. This will make sure that you don't over applicate in certain areas, and it'll prevent bubbling and weird bits later. A tip to remember while spraying is to move the model and not the spray can. This will make sure that you don't get a thick spray coming out that's uneven. Now that this first layer is dried, I'm really happy with the way it's turning out, so I'll start with the next layer. Another tip is to spray off the model for a few seconds before you start. This will remove any clogs and will make sure that you don't get a big burst all in one go. Now, while this isn't the first time I've used this particular paint, the undercoat has really made this one turn out very, very nicely, much better than the previous times I've used it. Alright, back inside now, and the paint is completely dried and it's time to start taking off all of the masking. Take your time as you're unwrapping the pins. They're fairly sensitive and can be broken easily if you're not careful. Now, my masking tape has actually pulled a little bit of the paint off. That means I'm going to have to repaint it before we can move on to the clear coat. With the touch-ups all dry, it's time for the last step, applying the clear coat. Same rules apply as with the gold paint. Make sure you give it a nice strong shake, spray off for a few seconds to make sure that it's completely unobstructed, and then start spraying in an even motion across. The first one will be a fairly thin, flimsy coat, the second one will be much, much thicker. I've chosen to place in the shade so that no bubbles form due to the heat. This isn't totally necessary, but it's a precaution I tend to take. And we're all done. Your very own custom Mercy hairpin. I think it's turned out really nicely. The gold looks gorgeous. There's a few errors I could have fixed up on the back, but overall I'm super happy with the way this turned out. The black looks great, the white really makes the black stand out, and the gold's just perfect. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked, hit the like button, subscribe if you want to, and tell me any comments you'd like below.